few weeks ago, I talked about a study that refuted one important part of Jared Diamond's seminal book, Guns, Germs, and Steel. And in the comments, a lot of you recommended I check out a podcast called If Books Could Kill, which I did, and I ended up really liking. So number one, I want to pass along that recommendation to the larger audience. And number two, I would like to swear I am not trying to step on their toes by discussing yet another popular science book that appears to be, let's say, flawed. I'm talking today about Jonathan Haidt's latest tome, The Anxious Generation: How the Great Rewiring of Childhood is Causing an Epidemic of Mental Illness. Haidt is a business school social psychologist at NYU whose work specializes in the evolutionary roots of moral behavior, with one of his landmark findings being the idea that people tend to have gut feelings about what is and is not moral, and that they invent post hoc logical reasons to explain those beliefs that they already have. He uses the metaphor of a rider on the back of an elephant. The elephant, your gut reaction, goes where it wants to go, while the rider, your conscious mind, makes up stories about why you really wanted to go in that direction. I'm honestly not sure if he invented this metaphor before or after the monkey riding on the back of a tiger metaphor that I've often heard to explain free will, but the idea is the same. There's a lot of good research showing that we humans tend to do things and then come up for a reason a split second afterward. It's all really fascinating. So I've always thought that Haidt's research is useful and thought-provoking. My friend P.Z. Myers agrees with me, or at least he did back in 2007 when he engaged in a little debate with Haidt on the Edge's conversation. He liked Haidt's thoughts on morality and its possible origins among humans, Haidt arguing that it likely arose as an adaptive trait that binds us together as a community, though P.Z. disagreed with Haidt on the idea that the new atheists at the time, like Richard Dawkins and Sam Harris, in their, at the time, recently published books, were also arguing from emotion and engaging in rhetorical tricks like cherry-picking research that fits their narrative. The presence of passions should alert us that the authors, being human, are likely to have great difficulty searching for and then fairly evaluating evidence that opposes their intuitive feelings about religion. The view that we are virtuous and our opponents are evil, Haidt writes, is a crucial step in uniting people behind a cause, and there's plenty of that in the New Atheist books. A second crucial step is to identify traitors in our midst and punish or humiliate them. It's really interesting to reread this debate 17 years later. Anyway, as so many new atheists went out of their way to try to prove Haidt correct. That said, I do think there's a lot Haidt got wrong back then, but I'm not going to sit here and give a point-by-point analysis of a debate that's, 2 decades old almost. But as always, if you'd like to read it, you can grab the link from this video's transcript, which is linked in the description below. Or maybe PZ wants to do an updated reaction, which I would read voraciously. Just throwing that out there in case you're watching PZ. Anyway, my point is that while I appreciate Haidt's research and agree with his thoughts on emotional moral reasoning, I do also disagree with him on other topics, particularly those in which he ventures outside of his field of expertise. And so I was actually considering picking up this latest book despite not having read his previous books. The Anxious Generation is apparently about how social media is making kids' lives worse, something I personally agreed with him on a gut level. I can't tell you how many times I've read about some kid getting caught doing something stupid or cringy or bigoted online and saying, God, I'm so glad social media didn't exist when I was a kid. Because I'm sure I did super cringy stuff and had terrible opinions. And I probably would have been even more cringy on the internet. And so when I think about it, I'm like, wow, I would have been either completely roasted by the entire planet, or I would have been horrifically self-conscious to the point where I would have been too scared to express myself at all. And I think that both of those things would have been a net negative for me and for my personal growth. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that things were better in the 80s and the 90s than they are now. We had lawn darts and lead and asbestos and the TV show Dinosaurs, which still gives me nightmares today. But I do feel Like, I had a kind of freedom that many kids today maybe don't. Freedom to be a dumbass kid without it following me around for the rest of my life. Freedom to not get bullied by kids outside of my zip code. And even a more literal freedom to ride my bike to school or play outside in the woods all day with no tether. Despite the fact that in the 80s, every parent did seem to be positive their child was going to be kidnapped by a stranger. It's like in the 80s, all of the parents just agreed, like, yes, inevitably, someone is going to rape and murder at least one of our children. But what are we going to do? Hire babysitters while we're at work? No, absolutely not. In fact, I would like to pause here to share that when I was a little kid, I was the cover girl for a service that tried to scare parents into videotaping and fingerprinting their children in case they're kidnapped. And every time I see this, I surprise myself with how hard I laugh at, she didn't come back. Like, I can't believe that Muffin the Cocker Spaniel didn't protect me from the predator while we were out getting the mail that day. Tragic. So yeah, anyway, I am at least emotionally on board with the thesis that social media is not great for kids, and I would be interested in a book exploring the evidence for and against that, since my more rational second thought on all of this suggests that, hey, just because kids these days have a different experience growing up than I had, it doesn't necessarily mean it's worse. I'd be very interested in that. And also, if the evidence tilts in favor of the thesis that, yes, it's bad, I'd like to see a discussion of possible solutions, since I'm skeptical of top-down fixes like laws banning TikTok. Despite my interest in the topic, I was a little skeptical of Haidt's ability to do it justice. After all, what does childhood development and social media have to do with the evolution and practice of morality? And so before the book came out, I looked into his other bestseller that is also not about morality and is also about how the kids are not all right. The Coddling of the American Mind, How Good Intentions and Bad Ideas Are Setting Up a Generation for Failure. In that book, Haidt posits that the problem with kids these days is not social media, but our overly liberal universities, where professors give trigger warnings and allow students to protest speakers they don't want on campus, and they get fired for having unpopular conservative opinions. Lower taxes, deregulation, no, you know which opinions. Now, that's a premise I find insipid, and I could not even imagine wasting my time reading. I have very little time to read these days as it is. That time is currently filled with The Count of Monte Cristo, a 600,000-page doorstopper about how morality is not a gut feeling, but is in fact just destroying everyone who has ever done you wrong, along with their parents, their children, and their pets. I think. I'm not done yet. It's been 6 months. So anyway, good news. You all turned me on to If Books Could Kill, and the hosts, Michael and Peter, have already covered The Coddling of the American Mind in full. And boy, am I glad I listened to them talk about it rather than bother to read it myself. I highly recommend you listen to the entire episode because they do add important context that Haidt apparently leaves out, like when Haidt describes one professor for being unfairly targeted as a racist without mentioning her virulent racism.
In August 2017, Wax and another law professor wrote an opinion piece for the Philadelphia Inquirer titled "Paying the Price for the Breakdown of the Country's Bourgeois Culture."
Oh, yeah.
The piece argued that many modern social problems could be traced to the decline of bourgeois values, such as hard work and getting married before having kids.
Oh, my God.
The most controversial line was, "All cultures are not equal, or at least they are not equal in preparing people to be productive in an advanced economy."
Oh.
She claimed that this was about culture and not race, but many people read it as a pretty clear racist dog whistle. The story that Haidt and Lukianoff tell is that the next week, a collection of students, alumni, and Penn Law faculty condemn the piece. They characterize this as a witch hunt and argue that none of these people addressed the substance of Wax's claims. But what they inexplicably leave out is that almost immediately after the op-ed was published, Wax did an interview with the Daily Pennsylvanian, the Penn student newspaper, where she touted the superiority of Anglo-Protestant culture and said, quote, "I don't shrink from the word superior, and everyone wants to go to countries ruled by white Europeans.
Height also apparently cites the case of one Brett Weinstein as an example of an unfairly silenced professor. So, that didn't age well. All of that didn't make me feel great about this new Haidt book, but I was still willing to give him a chance. Maybe he would tie this topic into his actual expertise, or maybe he would rely upon the scientific evidence presented by the experts in the field that he was discussing. To find out, let's ask Candace L. Odgers, Associate Dean for Research and a Professor of Psychological Science and Informatics at the University of California, Irvine. She also co-leads international networks on child development for both the Canadian Institute for Advanced Research in Toronto and the Jacobs Foundation based in Zurich, Switzerland. She writes, "Two things need to be said after reading The Anxious Generation. First, this book is going to sell a lot of copies because Jonathan Haidt is telling a scary story about children's development that many parents are primed to believe. Second, the book's repeated suggestion that digital technologies are rewiring our children's brains and causing an epidemic of mental illness is not supported by science." God damn it. Okay, so again, I recommend you read the entire review over on Nature because it is very detailed and links to lots and lots of scientific evidence to back up what she's saying. Essentially, though, she says that Haidt posits an overly simplistic cause for a very complex problem. Teen mental health appears to be getting worse, and at the same time, teens are spending more time on social media. His assertion is that social media is the primary cause of that decline in mental health, that social media companies have rewired childhood and changed human development on an almost unimaginable scale. In fact, Odgers explains, the consensus of experts in clinical psychology and child development and media studies, none of which are Haidt's areas, agree that if social media is bad for children, the effect is small, to the point that it is dwarfed by factors like economic inequality, the opioid epidemic, racial and other discrimination, and school shootings and other forms of violence. There have been dozens of systematic reviews and meta-analyses that support this. In fact, there are so many that support it that in 2022, a team of European psychologists did a systematic review of systematic reviews. After examining 7 meta-analyses, 9 systematic and 9 narrative reviews, results showed that most reviews interpreted the associations between social media use and mental health as weak or inconsistent, whereas a few qualified the same associations as substantial and deleterious. And it's worth noting that, yes, some of those studies found that social media is actually good for kids. So the evidence is really, really mixed. Is it completely out of the question that social media is bad for kids? Absolutely not. But right now, there is a lot of peer-reviewed research on this topic, and the vast majority have just found no significant impact at all. The studies that do show a correlation between depression and social media often suggest that the causation goes in the opposite direction from what Haidt is arguing. Depressed kids spend more time on social media. And if anybody ever wants to do a case study of a 40-something-year-old woman who has depression and is on social media, I think you'd find the same. When I get depressed, I fall into the doom scroll loop. It happens. It's certainly possible that the experts are wrong about this topic. But if they are, the correction is most likely to come from within their field. The same way that, if the majority of physicists are wrong about the existence of dark matter, they probably aren't going to be proven wrong by a sociologist dabbling in astrophysics for a book deal. They'll be proven wrong by physicists doing careful and informed work over a long period of time. Haidt's critics, the experts in these fields, point out that it's not just that he's wrong, and it's not just that he's inciting a new moral panic along the lines of video games are damaging children, or rock music is damaging children, or television, or radio, or books, or scrolls are damaging children. It's more problematic than that because there really is, at least there appears to be, a crisis right now in children's mental health. And if you tell parents that the solution is just take the kids' phones away or ban TikTok, then they'll do those things and think, Job well done. Meanwhile, our kids will still be taking time out of 5th period algebra to do active shooter drills. They're still going to go without dinner some nights. They're still going to be denied health care due to lack of money or too much conservative ideology in their state government. They're still going to have these pressures on their mental health. Only now, nobody's going to be looking for the solution because they think they already found it. Audre's review in Nature was fairly short, and I was interested in how she would respond to certain pointed questions. So I found a really interesting debate between Audres and Jim Steyer of Common Sense Media that followed a U.S. Surgeon General's warning about the potential risks of social media on kids. Listen to this absolutely brutal start.
In fact, I understand the two of you have at least virtually collaborated before. Is that right?
We have.
That's true. That's true. Candace has done research for Common Sense.
How did it go?
We're going to find out if Jim read it today.
Nah.
Audres admits that she actually can't stand social media, and she agrees that there is currently a mental health crisis amongst our kids. The issue is that despite what she emotionally wants to believe, the data just isn't there to make a causal link. And if you listen to that debate, and I hate to say this because some people just aren't good debaters and it shouldn't reflect on the actual argument, but it's really clear who here is arguing from emotion and who is arguing from data. Audre cites systematic reviews and a broad understanding of the data, while Steyer cites what we all know and what is obviously true. He also gets really angry. And like Haidt, he cherry picks some data that he thinks proves what he wants to believe is true.
Our team put together several meta-studies of the studies, and the overwhelming majority of them agree with Candace's take that, and I understand you're saying that there's maybe a problem with how they're focusing the studies, but that they're inconclusive on the issue of whether...
Because they're calling for pure causation. It's a different way of interpreting it, John. You're correct about the broad picture.
John, I'm talking about correlational studies find zero association.
I'm sure can find some, but you said about what the public thinks. You know why? Because they know it's right. If it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it is a duck. And that's what the situation is.
Is that
here.
Science, the duck?
No, but... I'm going to study that.
Social media is addictive, is it not? I mean, is that not like really, really, really built into the process by design?
Yeah, so people say that it's addictive, and the analogy I'll often give here, and I know the designers in the room will say that we design it to be addictive, that we're powerful enough to addict you. But here's here's the interesting part about like the addiction narrative is that the kids believe it, right? So kids believe it, parents believe it. When you ask people, is social media addictive, they believe it's true. But if you look at impairment, when you talk about addiction, it interferes with your sleep, with your ability to form friends. If we think of it from a clinical perspective of what addiction is, it's impairing in all these aspects. And what I'm saying is that when we look at those other aspects of life, there's the belief that people have that it's addictive, but we're not seeing evidence that social media is causing those impairments. And the analogy I would give is vaccines, right? We can ask people, it's important to know what people perceive of something like social media, that it's addictive, that it's harmful, right? That's one important piece of information. But we wouldn't go around and ask people about how efficacious they think vaccines are and assume that's the effect of vaccines, right? That's what we're doing with social media every day.
So the presumption that I built into my question reflected me being part of that problem of saying it's addictive, of course, and you're saying, no, the evidence really isn't there.
I just disagree. Some of this is just a basic disagreement, and I'm quite confident in my point of view. It is not the pure cause. It is a major contributing factor, and do not kid yourself, and the data is clear on that.
A very wise man once said, "The presence of passion should alert us that the authors, being human, are likely to have great difficulty searching for and then fairly evaluating evidence that opposes their intuitive feelings about religion or moral panics, I guess." Anyway, I've taken The Anxious Generation off my library hold list, but hey, if you've read it, I'd love to know what you thought about it in the comments. And in return, I'll let you know if The Count of Monte Cristo ever achieves true moral clarity in, I don't know, another 3 months or so. Hey everybody, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like. If you loved the video, please subscribe. And if you think the world could use more videos like this and you happen to have a few bucks laying around, head to patreon.com/Rebecca and join an awesome community of nerds like the people whose names you see on the screen right now. Thanks.